Hello, I'm Frank Caruso, producer of Oregon Life, and welcome to a brand new episode. I'd like to read you a passage from this book called Crossing the Driftless. I love that title. This chapter is called The 4th of July. On the morning of our nation's birthday, the rattling voices of sandhill cranes sound again, echoing mysteriously in the pale light of early dawn. The door of our tent fly is open, and through the screen I once again see nothing but cool white fog, as though the world outside the walls of our little green tent disappeared during the night. That is a beautiful passage into what you're about to discover as you meet the author as we traverse the Badfish Creek in this episode of Oregon Life.
Hi, I'm Lynne Diebel, and I'm a canoeist and an author. And with my husband, Bob Diebel, we do a lot of paddling. Okay, there's a rock right in the middle. Angle it over. Okay, beautiful. The great joy of canoeing rivers is the first few strokes, where the current catches us and we head downstream, especially on a river or a stream that we have never paddled before. It's a feeling of adventure, of motion, of being on the water. And we're off. Well, today we're here on the Badfish Creek, and we're paddling upstream through the Badfish Creek Wildlife Area, which is a DNR land. And the creek historically was channelized through here to help farmers have more land to plant. And so we are passing banks that are kind of high, and that's because the dredge material was put on the banks in order to make the channel deeper and accept the flow better. From this landing we just left, which is that Old Stage Road, the creek runs into an area where it does what's called meandering. It's the natural twisting and turning of a creek in this part of the country. It meanders its way through Cooksville and heads east to meet the Yahara River, the lower Yahara, which is the river that flows down from Madison through the lakes. And after the Badfish meets the Yahara, it flows down to the Rock River. And from the Rock River, joins the Mississippi at the Iowa border. And then the water flows from there down to the Gulf. To learn to paddle whitewater because our oldest son and his wife, she was his girlfriend at the time, said, we're going to take a class on the Wolf River up north. And the class was paddling whitewater. And they said, you want to join us? And so, of course, we said yes. And that introduced us to the joys of river paddling. The control strokes are things that you do on lake paddling anyway, but you get a lot more powerful effects once you've refined the strokes. And so, for instance, if I wanted to move the bow over in that direction, I'd go like that and continue it until I get it on the line that I wanted. And that's called a draw stroke, which is a cross bow draw, and is a very powerful one. And it actually saved us from, along with Bob's extremely strong paddling, saved us from going over a waterfall once up in Minnesota. Not a big waterfall. We would have survived, but the Vermilion River, which flows north into Rainy River, which is the boundary with Canada, and there's a little falls called Liftover Falls, and it's supposed to be just fine to run if you do things right. But we were getting kind of reckless and sassy, and we decided to run it, and we went over. And on those trips for the books, for the paddling books, I carried a small mini cassette recorder to keep track of stuff, and I thought, you know, this looks like we can do it, but I'm going to put it in my dry bag just in case. And so we went over, and the cassette player was saved, but Bob's camera took a bath. I've always liked to write. I had no aspirations to be an author or a writer of any specific kind of topic. I never aspired to write fiction, and yet I always loved to write. I majored in English in college, and I taught high school English for about 10 years, and yet I only started writing for the books because there was something specific to write about, and I knew I could do it because I loved doing it. And that was the beginning of my career as an author. My friend Jan Kalsher, who lives in Oregon, and I decided to collaborate on a book that was based on her photography, or her nature photography. It was finding letters of the alphabet in shapes in nature. Not manipulated nature, but nature as it really occurs. And Jan had the photographs, she had the full alphabet. She was just passionate about this, and she said, I want to make it into a book with poems. Would you help me? And so I said, sure, let's go. And so that's what we did. And the writing the poetry, after teaching poetry in high school, was a lot more fun than teaching it. And I really enjoyed that project. The book's still in print. The poems went through many revisions, and when I've done programs with kids on poetry and on writing, I have a sheet of revisions of one poem where it went through like 25 different versions. And one of the ways that we vetted the poems was to take them to kids and say, "Do you like this? Does this catch your interest?" And so we now have it printed by Lightning Source, just to continue it. So that was published in 2003, and the publisher at the time, Trails Books, said, "We understand you're a canoeist, and we have a series of books that started with canoeing northern Wisconsin, paddling northern Wisconsin, and paddling southern Wisconsin. And we wonder if you'd be interested in doing a series, the books for Minnesota." And so I talked to Bob, and he said sure. And so we signed up for 3 summers, about 3,000 miles of paddling together all over Minnesota, which is where I grew up. And I found places that I had never known existed in Minnesota during those months on the rivers. After 3,000 miles and 3 years, we're still married.
Hi there, I'm Bob Diebel. I'm on the other end of the canoe here, and I guess I'd describe myself as an engineer, a mechanical engineer, illustrator, photographer, and and paddler. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about in canoeing is that whenever we've given talks about canoeing, people, it's often couples, and they wonder about canoeing as a couple. And some people have compared canoeing to wallpapering, where it's very difficult for spouses to wallpaper together, and other people have said they've tried canoeing with their spouses and it's just been a disaster. Lynne and I really do well at that, and we've kind of developed our skills on each end of the boat. And so Lynne always stays in the front, I always stay in the back, and we really enjoy our skills. We've tried it the other way, and I'm miserable at the other end of the boat. And so anyway, we enjoy applying our skills in whitewater. We're not fanatics. We like up to maybe class 2 whitewater, if you know what that is. And so there's a lot of satisfaction in sort of scouting the river and looking at the line you need to take, and then going down through it. Then Lynne will often see some things up ahead that I can't see from back here. So she'll see a big rock, and by the stroke that she's doing, she doesn't even have to say it. I can see she's starting to move the nose of the canoe. So I'll start scooting the canoe over too, and then we'll just zoom right by a big rock. And so that's why rivers are kind of exciting compared to lakes, is because you have this constant challenge, and it's new around every bend. The other thing that people often wonder about, including Lynne's mother when we did this project, was, how do you do the shuttle, and how do you go downriver, and then how do you get your car and all that? And of course, a lot of people are familiar with shuttles with multiple cars, but we were on our own. And so what we did was we started out we tried to hire some people to shuttle us, but that was really just about impossible. And then we took a bike and dropped a bike at the end, and then I would bike back to the car, but sometimes that was a long bike ride at the end of the day. And so that was pretty tiring and kind of limited what we could do. And then, so I remembered that when I was in college, I went over one summer to Europe, and when I was in France, I saw these cool bicycles that had little motors on them called Solexes. And so I thought there must be some kind of little motor that you could put on a bicycle that would help out with this project. So I found one on the internet, ordered it. It's a little weed whacker motor, which makes a little drive, a little wheel rubs against the bike tire. And so with this thing, I could pedal along at Lance Armstrong kind of speeds. And I could do, at the end of the day, I could do 25 miles to go get the car while Lynne stayed with the canoe. And so I actually enjoyed that. As Lynne called it, I would enjoy my roaring off at the end of the day to go get the car. It was kind of a little different experience after paddling down a quiet river. So that was, yeah, a lot of people were curious about how we accomplished that. And so people are often amused by hearing the story about how we canoeists ended up using a little motor on a bicycle to make it all work, but that's what we did.
My favorite book of the 6 that I've written is Crossing the Driftless, and that's because it's a very, very personal book. It's a story of a trip that Bob and I took by canoe from Faribault, Minnesota to Stoughton, Wisconsin. And that path that we took by river crosses the Driftless area. The Driftless area is a part of Wisconsin and southeastern Minnesota and a little bit of Illinois and a little bit of Iowa that was not changed by the glacier that left this area about 10,000 years ago. It had never been glaciated, and for that reason it has a lovely terrain of hills and valleys and karst topography with caves and sinkholes, and it's hard to farm except up on the plateaus that are part of the ancient Paleozoic plateau that was carved out by the rivers of the region. But it's not hard to travel if you stick to the rivers, and that was what we decided to do. The Faribault, Minnesota connection is an old house on a lake outside of Faribault that my family has owned since the 1880s, and where I've spent part of every summer my entire life, and I'm 74 now. So that's a very important place to me. And connecting it to, we discovered that we could connect to our home in Stoughton, where we've lived for about 45 years, by looking at a map during the research for the Canoeing Minnesota books. It was a map that was created in the 1830s and 40s, and by a surveyor who was, when there were no roads there, and there were just rivers. And Bob looked at that map and he traced the route that we would take down the Cannon River, down the Mississippi, up the Wisconsin, up Black Earth Creek, portage into the Madison Lakes, and down the Yahara River to our home. And I said, "You're suggesting that we do this?" And he said, "I sure am." And so we decided to do it. And that was connecting two homes, my childhood summer home and our home for many years, by going over a land that was so beautiful and so dear to us. We've driven it we've driven it many, many, many times. Bob has ridden his bicycle between those two places. I've flown up to Rochester and then driven to Faribault. You know, it's the connection, but it's also the voyage. So that's why I love this book the most.
Well, Lynne, as she had explained earlier, has written the book Crossing the Driftless. And she and the publisher wanted to have some maps that accompanied each section of the paddling. And so I kind of volunteered to do those maps. And it was a very interesting project because I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I spent many years behind the drafting board drawing machinery. And so my natural inclination by doing that was to be precise and fussy and all that sort of thing. So the map thing kind of drew on those strengths because I did, you know, accurate to scale maps, but I also wanted to have some whimsy in there. So I drew in some things like that represented something that happened in the day or something, some feature along the route that we had taken some, you know, a picture of a barge, or in one day when we flipped the canoe over in big waves on Lake Pepin, I put a little drawing of us clinging to the side of an overturned canoe. And so it was a lot of fun. And it kind of got me out of the, you know, kind of more precise kind of drawing into a little bit more fun. So it was, I was really happy to help with that part of the book.
So in about 2006 or 7, a group started to protect the Badfish Creek. And the Badfish, as I've described before, is a little stream, and it feeds the Yahara and flows on down to the Gulf through the Rock and the Mississippi. But it is also the place where the sewage effluent comes from Madison and from Oregon, and that has had some bad effects on the badfish. And so our goal was to help the badfish as much as we could in this group. One of the things that has developed over the years is that the Badfish is a very popular place to canoe, and people kayak and canoe and love the stream because it winds and twists, and there's a lot of wildlife, and there's just a lot of beauty. And the establishment of a landing at Old Stage Road was one of our projects. We've done aquatic invasive species projects, trying to get rid of knotweed and wild parsnip, and but it's driven by people who love to be on the water. And we aren't a large group, but we've done a lot of good stuff. And recently, in the last couple of years, we've been working on a project of measuring E. coli levels in the creek and finding out through the Wisconsin Lab of Hygiene what the source is. It's called microbial source tracking. And they can say this E. coli comes from humans or this E. coli comes from ruminants. And they can do that with a lab test. Now, this is not a cheap lab test. And so we had to write grants for the expenses because we don't have income as a nonprofit group. We're a chapter of the Rock River Coalition, and they manage our finances, but the only inflow on the finances is the grants and a small amount from membership fees. So we've had an effect on state policy, a tentative effect on state policy, because the DNR has paid attention to the data that we collected over a period of 2 years with volunteers sampling the creek and sending the samples to the lab. The MMSD, which is Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District, not the school district, has listened to our efforts and also noted the numbers of people who we have measured paddling the creek. And that was most recently done with a trail cam, counting the people how many people pass the trail cam, and that's just a part of the creek. So the MMSD extended its period of what's called UV treatment for the disinfection for the effluent, in part based on our testimonies at public hearings. And Oregon is considering establishing UV protection, UV disinfection for the same reason, because we've presented to them. So we're proud of that. Our group has worked hard to make the creek a safer place to paddle. Thanks for watching this episode of Oregon Life.